The blood on Sigurd Jarlson's axe had long since dried, turning from crimson to the dark brown of autumn leaves. He wiped it clean with a handful of snow, watching as the frozen crystals melted against the metal, carrying away the stain of the day's battle. Around him, his fellow warriors moved among the bodies of the fallen Paxtons, collecting weapons and valuables while preparing their own dead for the journey home. "Leave nothing of value," Sigurd commanded, his voice carrying across the smoldering ruins of the village. "The gods have granted us victory this day. We honor them by taking what is rightfully ours." The raid had been swift and merciless, as all his raids were. The Paxton clan had stolen 3 of their fishing vessels during the harsh winter months when his people were vulnerable. Such disrespect could not go unanswered. It was the way of things, the eternal cycle of vengeance that had defined the relationship between their peoples for generations. As the last light of day faded, Sigurd gazed across the fjord toward the mountains beyond. His father's words echoed in his mind, "A Jarlson never forgets a blood debt. Our honor lives in our vengeance." For 15 years, Sigurd had lived by those words. Since watching his father fall beneath Paxton blades at the age of 12, he had dedicated himself to continuing their ancestral feud. Now, as the respected war leader of his people at 27 winters, he had led more successful raids than any before him. Yet the hollow feeling in his chest only seemed to grow with each village burned, each enemy slain. "We found something," Sigurd called Tormund, his most trusted warrior, interrupting his thoughts. "In the elder's hut. You should see this." Sigurd followed Tormund to a structure that had somehow survived the flames. Inside, illuminated by a single guttering candle, lay the body of an ancient man, his white beard stained with blood. The old man's eye stared sightlessly upward, his gnarled fingers still clutching a wooden box. "He fought to protect this," Tormund said, prying the box from the dead man's grip. "Must be valuable." Sigurd took the box, feeling an unexpected weight to it. The wood was ancient, carved with symbols he recognized as the old language, runes of power his grandmother had once spoken of. "This comes with me," he said. "Gather the men. We return home before the storm hits." As they sailed back across the dark waters, Sigurd sat alone at the prow of his longship, the wooden box heavy in his lap. The oath he had sworn on his father's pyre felt like a stone around his neck, to never rest until the last Paxton breathed their final breath. It was a righteous vow, a necessary one. The blood feud was his inheritance, his purpose. Yet lately, in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep eluded him, a treacherous thought had begun to form. What would remain when the last enemy fell? What would fill the void their hatred had occupied for so long? These were dangerous thoughts, unworthy of a warrior. Sigurd pushed them away as the familiar coastline of his homeland appeared through the mist. His people needed his strength, not his doubts. The blood feud was their way, it was the only way he had ever known. 3 days later, as winter's first true blizzard howled outside, Sigurd sat alone in his longhouse, the mysterious box before him on the table. He had not shown it to anyone else, sensing something personal, something meant for him alone. His fingers traced the intricate runes carved into its surface, symbols of Odin's wisdom, of Freya's sight, of journeys between worlds. When he finally opened it, he found inside a collection of small stones, each marked with a single rune, along with a piece of vellum covered in the spidery handwriting of the Paxton elder. Despite himself, Sigurd began to read, having learned the language of their enemies to better anticipate their movements. "To whomever finds this after my passing," it began, "I entrust the sacred runes of our common ancestors. Before we were Paxtons and Jarlsons, we were one people, bound by blood and oath. The feud that divides us began with a lie." Sigurd's hand trembled as he read on. The elder wrote of how, 3 generations ago, a terrible storm had caused a misunderstanding between 2 brothers, one, Sigurd's great-grandfather, the other, the ancestor of the Paxtons. A shared woman, accusations of betrayal, and a night of drunken violence had spiraled into generations of bloodshed. The runes speak truth when men cannot, the letter continued. Cast them at the sacred pool during the full moon, and the visions will show what truly happened that night. I have seen it, though too late in my life to heal the wounds between our peoples. Sigurd crumpled the parchment, anger flaring hot in his chest. This was deception, a final trick from a dying enemy. There could be no shed blood between his noble line and the treacherous Paxtons. The feud was just. His father's death demanded vengeance. And yet, the doubt that had been growing within him found fresh soil in these words. What if there was truth here? What if generations had died for a lie? The full moon was tomorrow night. The sacred pool the elder wrote of must be the still waters at Raven's Crag, a place both peoples considered holy despite their differences. I go to prove this false, Sigurd told himself as he gathered the rune stones back into their box. I go to reaffirm the righteousness of our cause. But in his heart, something else stirred, a hope he dared not name, even to himself. The sacred pool lay still as polished silver beneath the full moon when Sigurd arrived. Snow blanketed the surrounding forest, muffling all sound save the occasional crack of a frost-burdened branch. He had come alone, telling no one of his purpose. If this was indeed a trap, he would face it as a warrior should, and if it was truth, he needed to see it with his own eyes first. As he approached the water's edge, a movement in the trees across the pool caught his attention. His hand flew to his axe, body tensing for battle. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice echoing across the clearing. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman stood across the pool, her face partially obscured by the hood of her cloak, but the moonlight caught the gleam of golden hair beneath it. "You're far from home, Jarlson," she said, her voice clear in the still night. There was no fear in it, only caution. Sigurd's grip tightened on his axe. "As are you, Paxton. This is dangerous ground for your kind." The woman lowered her hood, revealing a face that struck Sigurd with its proud beauty. Her eyes, even at this distance, seemed to challenge him. "My name is Eir Paxtondottir, and I have as much right to be here as you." "Paxtondottir." Sigurd's brow furrowed. "You take our name in custom." "My mother was of your people, taken in a raid before I was born. She taught me your ways alongside my father's." Her chin lifted slightly. "I am of both worlds, whether either side wishes it or not." The revelation unsettled him. Children of captured women were not uncommon, but they rarely acknowledged both bloodlines so boldly. "Why are you here?" he demanded. She held up a wooden box identical to the one he carried. "My grandfather's dying wish." He spoke of runes that would reveal a truth about our families. Sigurd hesitated, suspicion warring with curiosity. "You knew the elder?" "He was my grandfather. I was not in the village during your raid. I returned to find him dying." Something flashed in her eyes, grief, anger, but also determination. His last words were to bring these here, tonight. They stood in silence, the weight of generations of bloodshed between them. Sigurd could kill her where she stood, one more Paxton dead in the endless feud. It would be expected. Honorable, even, by his people's reckoning. Instead, he found himself saying, "I have the same box. The same instruction." His eyes widened slightly. "Then perhaps we should do as he asked. What harm can come from stones cast into water?" What harm indeed, Sigurd thought, except the possible unraveling of everything he believed to be true. "We cast them together," he said finally. "On opposite sides of the pool." She nodded her agreement, and they each approached the water's edge. Sigurd opened his box, removing the smooth stone runes. Across the water, Eir did the same. On the count of 3, she called. 1, 2, 3. They cast the runes into the still water simultaneously. The stones broke the surface with barely a sound, slipping beneath the dark mirror of the pool. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to glow, faintly at first, then with increasing brightness until the entire clearing was bathed in otherworldly light. The surface of the pool rippled, though no wind stirred, and within the depths, images began to form. Sigurd and Eir both fell to their knees at the water's edge, transfixed by what they saw. The vision showed 2 men, clearly brothers by their similar features, sharing cups of mead in a longhouse. A woman sat between them, her hand occasionally touching each man's arm in turn. The scene shifted to later that night, an argument, words slurred with drink, a knife drawn not in anger but in a drunken attempt to emphasize a point. A stumble, a terrible accident, the knife finding flesh it was never meant to pierce. The brothers' faces contorted in horror at what had happened. Then came the misunderstanding, one brother believing the other had acted with intent, fleeing with the woman into the night, spreading word of betrayal and murder. The other, left with a dead kinsman he had accidentally slain while trying to protect his brother, allowed the lie to stand rather than admit his own terrible mistake. From this seed, the feud had grown, nurtured by pride and shame in equal measure, watered with the blood of generations. As the vision faded, Sigurd found his face wet with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. Across the pool, Eir looked equally shaken, her hands covering her mouth. "All this death," she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the water. "All this hatred. For a drunken accident and wounded pride." Sigurd felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. The certainty that had guided his entire life, the righteousness of his cause, the necessity of vengeance, crumbled like sand between his fingers. His father had died continuing a feud based on a lie. And he, Sigurd, had killed how many Paxtons in turn? Burned how many homes? Created how many more orphans to continue the cycle? "The runes show what we need to see, not always what we wish to see," he said, repeating his grandmother's teaching. "The question now is what we do with this truth." Eir stood, smoothing her cloak with trembling hands. "I cannot undo what has been done. Neither can you. But perhaps we can prevent more bloodshed. My people will not easily set aside generations of hatred," Sigurd warned. "Nor will mine." She took a step closer to the pool's edge. "But if the leaders of both clans stand together, they would sooner kill me as a traitor than listen. Then we must make them listen." For the first time, a smile touched her lips, tentative, but determined. "My grandfather believed it possible. That's why he preserved these runes, why he left them for us to find." Sigurd looked at her across the sacred pool, really looked at her, seeing past the name Paxton to the woman herself. Strong, proud, intelligent, she reminded him of the shield maidens of his own clan. In another life, he might have sought her hand in marriage rather than her blood in battle. The thought startled him with its suddenness and its rightness. "We need time," he said finally. "Time to find a way to present this truth that our people can accept." "Winter is upon us," Eir replied. "The deep snow will prevent major raids until spring. We have until then to find our path." "Meet me here again in 7 days," Sigurd said, making his decision. "Bring whatever your grandfather left about our shared history. I will do the same with my family's records." She studied him for a long moment, measuring his sincerity. "Do I have your oath that this is not a trap? That I will leave here alive tonight and when next we meet?" Sigurd drew his knife, startling her, but then used it only to cut his palm. He let his blood drip into the sacred pool. By Odin's eye and Thor's hammer, by the blood of my ancestors and my own blood freely given, I swear no harm will come to you from my hand or by my order. After a moment's hesitation, Eir drew her own small blade and did the same, her blood mingling with his in the still waters. 7 days, she agreed, and then she was gone, disappearing into the dark forest as silently as she had come. Sigurd remained by the pool long after she had left, his mind churning with all he had learned, all that had changed in a single night. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous for them both. Yet for the first time since his father's death, he felt something like hope stirring in his chest, a possibility that there might be something beyond vengeance to give his life meaning. Over the coming weeks, Sigurd and Eir met in secret at the sacred pool, each bringing pieces of their clan's histories to share. Together, they assembled the true story of their people's past, how they had once been a single clan that split after the tragic misunderstanding, how marriages had occasionally occurred between them despite the feud, explaining the similarities in their traditions and even in their appearances. Each meeting lasted longer than the last. What began as cautious exchanges of information gradually became conversations about their lives, their hopes, their doubts about the paths they had followed. Sigurd found himself admiring Eir's quick mind and fierce loyalty to her people, while she confessed to having always questioned the feud that had claimed her father and 2 brothers. "Sometimes I think we're like 2 trees that grew from the same root," Eir said one night as they sat near a small fire at the edge of the clearing, the sacred pool reflecting stars above them. "Forced apart but still part of the same living thing." "My grandmother used to say something similar," Sigurd replied, surprised by the parallel. "That feuds between kin are the most bitter because they're fighting their own reflection." Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, a recognition, a connection that went beyond their shared purpose. For the first time, Sigurd allowed himself to acknowledge the growing feeling in his chest. This woman who should have been his enemy had become someone whose presence he craved, whose thoughts he valued, whose smile made his heart beat faster. As midwinter approached, they formulated a plan. The traditional midwinter truce, the one time when all feuds were temporarily set aside so all could survive the harshest part of the year, would be their opportunity. They would request a formal assembly of both clans, to present their evidence and the vision from the runes. "It's a risk," Sigurd admitted as they finalized their plan. "If they reject the truth, we both could be branded traitors." "And if they accept it?" Eir asked, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then perhaps we find a way to live as our ancestors once did, as one people." The unspoken question hung between them, and what of us? What might we become to each other if our peoples were no longer enemies? But neither dared voice it yet. There was too much at stake, too much that could still go wrong. On the night before the midwinter feast, as snow fell gently around the sacred pool, Sigurd took Eir's hands in his. "Whatever happens tomorrow, know that meeting you has changed me. I see now that vengeance is an empty path that leads nowhere but to more suffering." Eir's fingers tightened around his. "And I have learned from you that true courage isn't found in continuing the battles of the past, but in having the strength to forge a different future." Sigurd leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Eir met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt both like a beginning and like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed despite the cold, Sigurd pressed his forehead against hers. "If our people cannot find peace," he whispered, "would you consider a life elsewhere? There are settlements to the west where no one would know of our feud." "I would follow you even to the edge of Midgard," she replied. "But first, we owe it to those who have died to try to end this cycle of bloodshed." With one last embrace, they parted, each returning to their own village to prepare for the momentous day ahead. The midwinter thing was held on neutral ground, a flat expanse of land between their territories where stone markers had stood for generations, denoting the boundary neither side should cross in aggression. Today, with the truce in effect, warriors from both clans stood in uneasy proximity, hands never far from their weapons despite the peace that tradition demanded. Sigurd had spent the morning in intense negotiation with his council of elders, convincing them to hear what he had discovered. Many were skeptical, some openly hostile to the idea of questioning the feud's legitimacy. But his position as war leader gave his words weight, and in the end, they had agreed to listen, if only to reaffirm their conviction in the righteousness of their cause. As the two clans assembled on opposite sides of the field, Sigurd scanned the crowd for Eir. He found her standing with her clan's leaders, her golden hair distinctive even at a distance. She gave him a subtle nod. She had succeeded in convincing her people to participate as well. The thing began with the traditional formalities, declarations of the truce, acknowledgements of grievances to be set aside until spring, arrangements for limited winter trading. When these matters were concluded, Sigurd stepped forward into the space between the clans. "I have called for this assembly to present evidence of a matter that concerns us all," he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed field. "For generations, our peoples have shed each other's blood in a feud that has claimed countless lives. Today, I bring before you the truth of how this feud began, a truth that has been hidden for too long." Murmurs rose from both sides. From his own clan, looks of confusion and betrayal; from the Paxtons, suspicion and disbelief. "I do not stand alone in this," Sigurd continued, gesturing toward the Paxton side. "Eir Paxtondottir shares this discovery and stands with me to present it." Eir moved forward to join him, causing a ripple of shock through both assemblies. For leaders of the feuding clans to stand together, apparently allied, was unprecedented. "Many of you know that I led a raid against the Paxton village before the first snow," Sigurd said. "What you do not know is that I found something there, a box of ancient runes left by their elder, who was the keeper of their histories. And I," Eir added, her clear voice joining his, "discovered my grandfather had left an identical box for me, with instructions that could only be fulfilled with the cooperation of a Jarlson." Together, they recounted their experiences at the sacred pool, the casting of the runes, the vision they had both witnessed, and the subsequent discoveries they had made in their clan histories that confirmed the truth of what they had seen. "The feud that has defined our peoples for generations began with a tragic accident and a misunderstanding," Sigurd declared. "Brother turned against brother not from hatred but from grief and shame. And we, their descendants, have perpetuated their mistake through centuries of bloodshed." The field had fallen completely silent. Faces on both sides showed shock, disbelief, anger, and, from some of the older members, a dawning recognition. "We bring before you not just our words, but proof," Eir said, gesturing to several elders from both clans who carried forward ancient records, family histories, and the rune stones themselves. "Tonight is the longest night of the year," Sigurd continued. "Traditionally, it is a time when we reflect on the past and look toward the future. I ask you all to consider, what future do we choose? Do we continue to kill each other for a wrong that never truly existed? Or do we find the courage to forge a new path?" A tense silence followed his words. Then, from the Jarlson side, an old woman stepped forward, Sigurd's grandmother, Astrid, respected for her wisdom and her knowledge of the old ways. "I have long suspected something of this nature," she said, her voice thin but strong. "There were inconsistencies in our histories, questions my own grandmother would not answer about the beginning of the feud. If what you have shown us is true, if the sacred runes have revealed this vision to both a Jarlson and a Paxton, then the gods themselves are telling us it is time for this bloodshed to end." From the Paxton side, a grizzled warrior with a scar running down his face pushed forward. "Pretty words and old stories don't erase the dead," he growled. "My sons died at Jarlson hands. Am I to forget that because of some vision in a pool?" "No one asked you to forget, Hakon," Eir replied steadily. We ask only that you help us ensure no more sons die for a lie." "And what would you have us do?" asked another Paxton elder. "Centuries of hatred cannot be washed away in a single day." "We begin with truth," Sigurd answered. "We acknowledge our shared ancestry. We establish new laws between our peoples, not just a winter truce, but a lasting peace. And perhaps, in time, we find ways to become one people again, as we once were." The debate raged for hours as the sun crossed its low winter arc and began to set. Voices were raised in anger, in skepticism, in cautious hope. Old grievances were aired, recent wounds reopened. At times, it seemed the assembly would dissolve into violence despite the truce. Through it all, Sigurd and Eir stood firm together, answering questions, providing evidence, calling on those elders from both sides who had begun to support them. As darkness fell and torches were lit around the field, a tentative consensus began to emerge. No one was willing to immediately set aside generations of enmity, but most acknowledged that the origins of the feud had been misrepresented. A council was proposed, 6 members from each clan who would work together through the winter to establish new laws and boundaries. And, most significantly, a cessation of all raids and retributions until at least midsummer, when the council would present its recommendations. As the thing concluded and the clans prepared to return to their respective villages for the midwinter feast, Sigurd found himself standing once again with Eir in the space between their peoples. "It's a beginning," she said quietly. "Not the complete reconciliation we hoped for, but a beginning." "It's more than I dared to expect," Sigurd admitted. "Old hatreds die hard. But they saw the truth today, and enough of them were willing to consider it." Eir glanced toward her clan, then back to Sigurd. "I've been named to our council." "Have you?" "Yes," he nodded. "Our elders insisted I lead our delegation." A smile touched her lips. "Then we'll be working closely together through the winter." "A hardship I will somehow endure," he replied, allowing himself to return her smile. Around them, members of both clans were watching their interaction with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and, from some, understanding. The path ahead would not be easy, but they had taken the first step. "Tonight, we feast separately," Sigurd said. "But perhaps by next midwinter." "We'll feast together," Eir finished for him. "As one people." Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining briefly before they parted, each returning to their clan. But both knew that something fundamental had changed, not just between their peoples, but between themselves. What had begun as a discovery of shared history had become something deeper, a bond that transcended the ancient feud. As Sigurd led his people back toward their village, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. Eir stood watching him, her golden hair catching the torchlight. In her face, he saw the future he had never allowed himself to imagine, a future not defined by vengeance and bloodshed, but by healing and unity. And perhaps, if the gods favored them, by love. The winter passed in a flurry of council meetings, tense negotiations, and gradual, halting progress toward reconciliation. The ancient feud could not be undone in a single season, but seeds of understanding were planted and began, slowly, to take root. Through it all, Sigurd and Eir worked side by side, their growing feelings for each other becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. What had begun as secret meetings by the sacred pool transformed into public cooperation, their unity serving as a living example of what their divided peoples might become. By the first thaw, when crocuses pushed through the melting snow and birds returned to the fjord, the council had established a framework for peace, shared fishing rights, a process for resolving disputes, a prohibition on raids between their clans, and, most radically, the possibility of marriage alliances to bind their peoples together once more. It was this last provision that brought Sigurd and Eir once again to the sacred pool as spring approached. The moon hung full above them, just as it had on that fateful night when they first cast the runes together. "The council has approved the peace terms," Sigurd said, pacing along the water's edge. "But there are still those who resist, who cling to the old hatreds." "There always will be," Eir replied. "We cannot change every heart at once. But we've made more progress than I ever thought possible." Sigurd stopped pacing and turned to face her. In the months since their first meeting, she had become everything to him: advisor, partner, friend, and something deeper that neither had fully acknowledged aloud. "There is one more thing I believe would strengthen our alliance," he said, his heart pounding. "Something personal between us." Eir's eyes widened slightly. "What do you propose?" Instead of answering immediately, Sigurd took her hands in his. "When I found those runes, I believed I was seeking truth about the past. I never imagined they would show me my future as well." He knelt before her, still holding her hands. "Eir Paxtondottir, you were once my enemy, then my ally, and now you hold my heart. Our peoples were once one, torn apart by misunderstanding and pride. Let us be the first to reunite them, not just through laws and councils, but through love and family." Tears shimmered in Eir's eyes, catching the moonlight. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Sigurd Jarlson?" "I am asking if you will join your life to mine," he said solemnly. "If you will stand with me before both our peoples and show them that the future we envision is possible. If you will be my wife, my partner in building the peace we've only begun to create." For a moment, she was silent, and Sigurd felt a flicker of uncertainty. Then Eir pulled him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. Their kiss was witnessed only by the moon and stars above and the still waters of the sacred pool, the same waters that had shown them the truth and set them on this unexpected path together. Their wedding, held at midsummer on the neutral ground between their territories, became a symbol of the new alliance. Members of both clans attended, some enthusiastic, others wary but willing to honor the peace their leaders had established. The ceremony combined traditions from both peoples. Sigurd and Eir exchanged swords and rings, spoke oaths before the gods, and jumped together over a fire to ensure fertility and good fortune. As the hand-fasting ribbons were tied around their joined hands, binding them together as husband and wife, Sigurd looked out at the assembled clans, no longer separated on opposite sides of the field, but beginning to mingle, to share food and drink, to speak cautiously of shared future rather than bitter past. "Look at them," he murmured to Eir as they completed the ritual. "This is just the beginning of what we can accomplish together." "The sacred runes showed us the truth of our past," Eir replied, her eyes shining with joy and purpose. "But it's up to us to write the truth of our future." As the celebration continued into the night, with music and feasting replacing the sounds of battle that had once defined their relationship, Sigurd knew that their journey was far from complete. There would be challenges ahead, resistance to overcome, old wounds that would reopen and need to heal again. But for the first time, he faced the future not with the heavy burden of continuing an ancient feud, but with the lightness of creating something new. The false belief that had driven him for so long, that vengeance was his inheritance and purpose, had been replaced by a deeper truth, that healing could be more powerful than hatred, and love more enduring than war. Under the midsummer stars, surrounded by two peoples slowly becoming one again, Sigurd and Eir danced together, their shadows merging on the ground beneath them just as their lives and their clans had begun to merge, separate but unified, distinct but harmonious, writing with every step a new saga for the generations that would follow. The sacred runes had indeed changed their world forever, not by revealing some mystical power, but by exposing a simple, forgotten truth, that what hatred had divided, love could once again unite.